All right, so here we go. This is bridging brand and product design. So here we go. So I'll just get right to it. We'll start this off with a little bit about me, and then we're going to focus on the blurring of brand and product, and follow it up with just some tips on how we can bridge some of those gaps between brand and product with a process that I call MUX, which is short for marketing UX. But first, yeah, just a little bit about me. As already said, I'm a senior UX designer at Issue, which is a content platform that allows you to upload, publish, and share your content, particularly as a digital flipbook or magazine, in a lot of different spaces. And then on the academic side, also as already said, I studied art and international relations. And during that time, I've been curious about the feedback loop between the visualization of ideas and big events out there in the real world. So it starts off a little bit with this story right here. So I've been interested in a lot of topics around this. I think the main one here on the left is maybe a good starting point. So Alexander the Great, when he took over a lot of spaces in ancient Greece, he did a lot to make his, basically his name and his brand known through his profile, quite literally his profile on a coin. And then as time passed, he was able to get people even in different countries with different languages and different literacy levels to recognize when he took over an area that he was in control of it. Essentially also the same thing happened with the Medici family many years later in Renaissance Italy. They also used the profile because they were aware of that symbolism from Alexander's time. And it's particularly interesting in the academic sense how that concept of a profile just continues to have such an impact on how we look at things. And so even in today's social world, we still see the profile as this abstract thing. So ideas like that were driving a lot of what was interesting to me when I was looking at international affairs and how symbolism can really make those big changes in the real world. My early design career was a freelancer. I started out my career doing illustration and copywriting for brands, and my early brand work had a strong impact on how I look at UX today. Here's a couple of clients. Basically, there's too many to count, but I want to talk a little bit about how a couple of those clients actually impacted how I look at branding and how I look at design. So one of my first clients when I got to Berlin was Denise Kurtel. She was a multimedia artist focusing on installation art as well as music production. And she had a space in Brooklyn called the Fifth House. So she was a little bit in Berlin, a little bit in New York. We worked together on her Studio 54 inspired logo, this number 5 here on the left, and how we could place it in her Brooklyn art space in kind of an unassuming underground way. And then how we could then, through her website for the Fifth House, embody what was going on inside, promote it from a more digital space, because the outside wasn't as flattering in real life. But once you got inside, you could see this kind of beautiful, ornate, sort of hipster space. This was an illustration I did on the left, trying to capture the atmosphere of that space. Couple of key learnings I got from Denise, among many. The main ones are here on the left. Digital spaces and how their design can have a substantial impact on events in the real world. And then second off, curating imagery in an art space relies on many of the same principles as curation in a digital space. So when we were having these events, it was everything from music events to photo shoots to sometimes even a yard sale. We would try to create imagery online that reflected the audience who was coming to view it, and then also the people who would attend and what kind of atmosphere we wanted to achieve. Very different client, Union Berlin, which is based in Berlin-Köpenick, was another client that really had a huge impact on how I looked at brand identity and its space and really creating a coherent product ecosystem. So I did a lot of things for Union Berlin. A lot were around digital content, digital engagement. A lot of it was focused on branded illustrations, but also merchandise. We also focused a lot on some character design, especially for a line of branded kids products. We also did a really cool wallpaper. This is one I designed that was built around the DRK clinic in Köpenick in Berlin. So when you are in the maternity ward and you're an Union Berlin fan and your child is born, the first thing they can see, or one of the first things they can see, is a wallpaper supporting their future favorite football club. Now, that's all fun and good. One of the most intimate projects I worked with them on was this series of nostalgia shirts, which I thought to be a simple task at first, but turned out to be very complex. It focused a lot on really understanding the history and the identity of the football club, and also where its place was in history. Union Berlin was founded in former East Germany, and even today, as it continues in the Bundesliga, it's a club that has a deep connection to former East Germany, but because of the controversial past of former East Germany, it creates a question of what kind of imagery we really want to depict in especially a nostalgia shirt. So what are people particularly nostalgic for about that time? What about that identity is worth reflecting in the club? I think anybody who's familiar with football clubs, especially in Europe and South America, know that there's a broader identity that brand can represent, and it's important to be conscious of the symbolism that you choose, what incites the right part of history, what is respectful to the roots of the club. And it got me thinking a lot about how even a simple product or a simple branding effort needs to be conscious of those things. Key learnings from Union Berlin: know your audience, know where they're coming from, and know that concepts inform imagery, and imagery reassures people that they're in good hands. You want your audience to feel like they're in good hands if you want to have a successful product. Another client, Neon Wood, they're a student housing space in Berlin. They built a massive building around Friedrichshain and also around Mitte. And when they first launched, I was on the team that basically did their first round of digital marketing, but also just their digital presence online. So I was brought on as a copywriter and a UX writer, focusing on conversion. And so we spent a lot of time looking at the spaces that were built and trying to reflect them in our digital experience and how we describe the different amenities of the student housing. Especially for international students, this was extremely important because they needed to know they would have a place to stay before their academics got started. We took special care to make sure that the digital experience was something that was indicative of the real space, so people didn't have a mixed set of expectations once they got going. And we also took a lot of care to make sure that the text was a reassuring tone that would make sense and align with any marketing campaigns that they were doing. Key learnings from Neon Wood, there were quite a few, but essentially it comes down to marketers design stories. And then to succeed in marketing, you need to know you're designing a meaningful story. Also, your digital experience is your brand story because there's nothing online except what you've chosen to tell people, especially if it's your own website and your own brand. Fourth, marketing and brand identity directly impact usability. So, for example, if people are not sure what they're navigating because they've gotten a different expectation from how you've branded something, that's going to impact their ability to use your product or service. In our case, it was using the tool that was booking your student accommodation for a certain period of time. And then the last one, altering a digital space will inevitably alter something in the real world. And then key learnings from about 2016 on, this is a lot more broad, but I think it's worth pointing out. In the right digital space, at just the right moment, the right story can change just about everything. Couple examples I have here on the screen. Donald Trump, during his campaign in 2016, very famously tweeted an image of himself as the infamous Pepe the Frog, which was a viral meme that, although representing many things, also was used to represent Trump. And so his choice to go into 4chan and pick this image out and tweet it sent a pretty intense message about his campaign, but one that did have real effects in the real world. On a much lighter and smaller note, these icons on the left are icons I designed for some online fact sheets that were handed out to representatives in California during an initiative to get the California legislature to sign off on SB 32 and SB 40, which were some climate initiatives to get California carbon neutral by about mid-century. So the internet can influence a lot of things, but having the right story at the right moment is the main focus there. And for me, that focus led me to conclude this is where we blur the line between story and reality, and also between products and brands. Which brings me to part 2, which is blurring brand and product. If you look at this here, this is typically how companies try to operate when they're trying to market and sell a product or a service. You have branding people in one silo and product people on the other. They're the people who promote the product, try and get people to buy it. And then there are the people who design and build the product. But if you're dealing with software, if you're dealing with a website heavy product experience, the people who are interacting with your product or service, they're typically going to see this. The line between brand and product is blurred because it's all essentially a digital experience. So what do I mean by that? I want everyone to maybe take a brief look here and ask themselves, when does a digital product start to be your product? This is a pretty typical flow here. Someone sees an ad, they go to a website that the ad leads them to. If they click the CTA button, they start onboarding with the product, trying to understand how it works. Along the way, they might have a question, go to the support section of the website or maybe somewhere else. And then they eventually use the app. Now, if you're a part of a marketing team or a UX team, you might see pieces of all of this where you have some skin in the game, or you are responsible for something, or how someone else's work could influence yours. So it's not terribly clear. And that's my main point. The digitization of many products and services make the domains of brand and product difficult to mark. So when does a digital product start to be your product? My answer would be, as far as user experience is concerned, your brand is your product and your product is your brand. And that was probably always the case. I mean, software just made it unignorable. So another way of looking at it would be like this. One of my favorite designers, John Maida, puts it pretty succinctly. If your product is a digital experience, then your marketing is also your product. Because online people are not going to be able to see that difference that you see between different departments at your places of work. So then I would ask people to think about this when they go back to their places of work or when they're thinking about this in a meeting. Who handles these kinds of tasks at your company? Is it marketing or is it UX? UX copy sounds like it might be a UX concern, but there's a lot of aspirational branding in how you describe features even when you're inside of a product. In-app messaging, very similar. If you're doing CTAs for a website, maybe marketing is responsible for getting those numbers up, but there's some UX rules you want to consider. The same is true for pricing pages, brand colors, and the like. I mean, operationally, it's very difficult to get organizations to work from the perspective of someone who's actually using their products, because what it takes to create a product is such a different landscape. I would encourage people, though, not to look at it like a blur, but actually like a bow tie. This is a little model I created, which I call the bow tie model. And essentially, it's puts product at the middle, but it has a broader view of product. So the way I think of the bow tie model is like this. Look at your product as the relationship that ties your user base and your organization together. And so in summary of just this section and everything related to bow ties and brands and products and all that, the main thing you have to remember, because I know I've given a lot of examples, is that every touch point with your product is your product. So digital or analog, branded or not, there's no reason not to consider a brand for everything, or at least your branding strategy. And that's what brings me to how marketing and UX can think about working together, or as I like to call it, MUX. So this brings us to part 3, bridging the brand and the product design using MUX. So MUX is just short for marketing UX, and the purpose of it is to identify and define where marketing and UX goals overlap. The idea came from my last place of work, workstreams.ai, which you can see here on the left in the working from home section in Slack's app directory. Essentially, we were working on a tool that allows you to create task management on a channel by channel basis in Slack. And we had a lot of questions about how to communicate the value and function of our product to people who were not only new to our product or service, but were new to Slack, because you needed to use Slack to use workstreams. So some of the main questions we asked ourselves were, how do we communicate with users on Slack? How do we communicate with users in our application? How do we communicate with users on our support page? How do we make features and integrations recognizable in multiple formats? How do we communicate with potential users on our homepage? And how do we communicate with potential users in our marketing campaigns? And it's a long list, and there were even more than this, but those were the main ones. I think the most important thing to consider here is that there was a broad need to align these things, because if even one of them was out of line, you had a break in people's understanding of the product. So here's how I would say we pursued Mux at Workstreams, and it was we tried to achieve a visual and editorial consistency across our platform, on Slack, and on our website, and across most of our marketing campaigns. There's a lot of campaigns, so you can't quite get all of them, but the overwhelming majority. And that was important because if you look here, a product can't really tell the whole story intuitively. No matter how good your UX is, even if you want to line it up as nicely as you can, you want to give a sense of a narrative, not just about how you'd like to be perceived, but also about how your product works. So on the left here, you can see a Slack conversation and how our bot looked in Slack and how it would view tickets, which we were very much limited to showing in the format that Slack had for us. But then on the right, you can see tickets in more of a Kanban board column format. That's a lot to communicate in just text alone. So this is where we started playing with branded imagery. So this is what happens when you try to show product functionality inside of a brand. It might not be 100% apparent here, but you can still see a Slack conversation, then our logo translating into a task board where teamwork is happening, where things are getting done. If you put this with a support article or with something on a website, or even with some prompts inside of an interface or imagery that's similar, you save yourself a lot of time describing things, and you crystallize an image in someone's head as you make your value proposition. Side note, this is why I think it's very important to leverage visuals as much as possible. And I know there's a lot of pushback on that out there, so I really want to make that point. Illustrations, GIFs, and animations all impact the usability of your product. So don't just use them to put lipstick on a pig. They can be used to explain things. They should be used to explain things. Always advocate for that. Just my point of view. Which brings me to the last section of this talk, which is about practicing Mux. So I've given a lot of examples of things that are meaningful to me in terms of product and brand, why I think there's a blur, why I think it ties in best when you have a set of goals with marketing and user experience. But I want to give you guys something that helps actually implement this where you guys do your current work. So the first thing would be regularly just exchange data and feedback. UX designers, share your research with your marketing. They value it, makes them more likely to share research with you. Marketers, it's great when you share your analytics data on users with UX designers, so you guys can strategize about everything from brand to how an interaction should go inside the application. Second, involve marketing in website wireframing. I emphasize involve mainly just because it's not marketing's job to do wireframing, but marketing does have a right to state its case for why certain things should be as they are. So UX designers encourage marketers to sketch out and share their ideas before you get started creating your websites. Listen to their needs. Marketers, I would say, let UX designers make the final call on page layout after your input has been properly communicated, mainly just because the UX team is trying to make things as coherent as they can. And a marketing goal can sometimes interrupt with that, but it doesn't mean finding a middle point is not possible. Third, involve UX in content creation. So UX designers, make sure the brand ecosystem makes sense within the UI. Marketers, it's good to find opportunities to inject branded illustrations into the UI. This is especially important if you're working on a software product that has integrations or integrates with a tool that already has a strong brand, like we had with Slack at Workstreams. The reason is because illustrations can sometimes be your one calling card to make something recognizable in your brand ecosystem and make that thing strong and coherent. And then third, in that space, align on a common narrative. And when you have a narrative, you have to have visuals that represent it, like with the Union Berlin example. That concept predates your content, especially your visual content. So try to create shared visual guidelines. That means UX designers have the product look and feel in a way that reflects brand identity. And then marketers, have your brand materials make sense alongside the UI. Additionally, create shared editorial guidelines. So align on tone and terminology in marketing and make sure that your UX copy is reflecting that. Additionally, it doesn't have to be exactly the same. They're guidelines. So marketing text is often a little more aspirational, a little more intense. And sometimes UX copy has to focus on having some brevity and really trying to make like an impactful mark on how someone understands something. Possible when the trade-off isn't too high. Sixth, it's good to get marketing and UX talking to other stakeholders. So share the work of communicating your value proposition to other departments. UX and marketing have a lot of touch points on what's going on with a user base, what's going on with market opportunities, and what's going on with the organization in terms of getting features promised and planned. So I think that's true for a lot of other departments too, but given that there's a unique burden on people in brand and people in product to really communicate well, that communication shouldn't just always be going to the user base, but to your organization at large. So tying back into that bow tie model. And then the last one, build relationships and mutual support. It's corny, but I gotta say it, none of these MUX tips will work unless there's a mutual trust and a genuine desire to help other departments. So I think that one is probably the one I want to hit the hardest. Is it's not great to go in somewhere and say, let's do MUX now. It's one of those things where it's ideally done by first establishing that first bit of trust. And wrapping up, I mean, I think what I want to just close with is the sense that when it comes to product and branding, the most important thing you can do is communicate, and communicate the value of what you do in your digital spaces can have a real impact for the people in your organization, and your product, digital or not, and yeah, in the world at large. So I'll be talking about that in a few other lectures coming up, which I want to put online. So if that's something of interest to you, please feel free to get in touch, shoot me an email. You can go on my website and check a few things out. I will be sending out some messages for people who are interested in the lectures I'm uploading next. So on that note, I guess we can open up for Q&A, and happy St. Patrick's Day, everybody.
Very nice. Thanks, Jesse. Is it really St. Patrick's Day today?
I was reminded of that too.
Okay. I just, those things go past me all the time. But yeah, this was really great. I love seeing these presentations. I got a little sneak peek last week, and it's really great seeing the iterations of it. And I've known Jesse for a little while now, and like every time you talk, I like realize how much some of our backgrounds and interest overlap more and more. And I think I don't technically do UX, and I don't technically do marketing. I do more branding and web design for clients, and like all these things that you were talking about like have so much relevance to even the client that I was working with today and stuff like that. So I think that even outside of these two areas that you were talking about, there's a lot of like overlap with like making sure that the communication is there and the illustrations that they're using on their branding market like materials is the same that they're using in the app, which is the same on the website and stuff like that. So I think it's really interesting. But I don't want to monopolize the time, and we do have a fair amount of questions. So I will start off with those. So we have a two-part question, or there's one from Kenji in here, and I know there's two parts, so I want to make sure I put them together. So he says many companies, especially in the SaaS space, have a kind of different feel between their marketing websites and the actual products that they have. Examples: Salesforce and Zendesk. How much overall do you think the identity has to be the same in the product as it is on the marketing website? Like color, type, illustrations, etc. Or better, what might be some non-negotiable in your opinion between those two?
So I think those are two really good examples. Like Zendesk, first of all, has an outstanding branding, and Salesforce, I mean, has a lot of brand recognition, although I know it's not known for its like peak beauty in terms of UI all the time. So if I understand the question right, I mean, it's how do you set guidelines? I would say it's very case dependent. Like, I think that's why I spent a lot of time trying to unpack the Slack example. consumer driven. So if you're trying to attract people on, say, Spotify, the visual stuff is going to be much more important than maybe something that's more of like an internal tool. And in terms of visual guidelines, there's not really, I guess it's like the talk. I mean, there's not like a cutoff point per se. These things are blurred. So I would just suggest, if you're not sure about those things, to try and build some relationships with the people you're trying to work with, and try and look for opportunities where your goals are the same. And then when your goals are the same, it's often pretty easy to create imagery that's the same enough to achieve those goals.
Mm-hmm. So maybe like not hard rules of like it has to be exactly the same color or typeface, but like maybe it's more about like the look and feel of them working together in a way.
Yeah, like if I were to, as explicit as I would get, is it's really nice, for example, when there's a marketing site that has more flexibility than the UI, because marketing sites have to promote more. That's one thing that almost every company I've chatted with has discussed, is relative to the UI. But at the same time, you wouldn't want to have colors in the website palette that maybe means something very explicit in the UI. So if there's a color that means delete now in your UI, you wouldn't want that to be maybe your add now button when you're first on the website. So I think it's more about colors have meanings, and you don't want to have contradictory meanings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. We have another question in from Hannah, not me. She says, do you think that the relationship between marketing and UX is better off being direct, i.e. not via project managers?
It depends on your project manager. I mean, if they're a wonderful project manager, maybe it's great. I think, though, it can't be facilitated exclusively through like a third party. So it can't just be managers talking. I think if someone's making graphic designs, it would be great if they can talk to someone who's handling the UI, and those people aren't always the manager.
Yeah. When you had experience at your last company, I know that you also said there was like a Slack channel that you guys were working with. And so was that where you think like most of the communication was happening? Or what other ways were you guys like facilitating these conversations?
So we were using Slack a lot. And I mean, I think the thing that we really did, at first it was quite easy, because when we started, you could be in an office. And then when COVID hit, we had this big spike in users, like a lot of people who were doing stuff in Slack's universe at first. And then what we tried to do was, at least in Slack, create channels for those things. So we had a UX channel, and we had a marketing channel, and then we literally had a MUX channel. I think I didn't even come up with the term MUX. I think it was someone else. I think it was one of our developers. But it was this. It was just a space where we would very explicitly see where the goals of marketing and where the goals of UX would overlap, and then prioritize tasks in that space in a way where everybody could see it.
Mm-hmm. So I have another question. So was it just marketing and brand in there? Or did you have like developers in there too, or other people were like allowed, or like in that MUX channel also?
Everybody was invited to like see it. It wasn't a secret. But I think, most of the time, the developers didn't have like materials they wanted to drop off there. So, they could see it, but the people who were working in it were the people who were concerned with the marketing and with the UI.
Okay. Yeah, and we have like a somewhat similar question. So this is from Esther, and she's asking, how would you suggest bridging brand and product when working in a large company? So, for example, when brand and product teams have different KPIs that may not overlap.
That's a great question. So, I've recently started at Issue, which is not, I would say, a super large company, but it's got something north of 80 or 90 employees, and work streams had about 12, So I'm kind of unpacking how to do that as well. In terms of building trust, I think, especially in a pandemic, I think it's good to make a personal connection when you can. I know that's kind of a generic answer, but when it's a big organization, I think it's often good to identify a touch point with someone in a different department, or sometimes even in a different office, and try and just informally try to get to know people. And then you can start talking about where where you guys have the same goals and then have the same difficulties. Because you'll find them at one point, and it's better to find them early and with a connection to that person.
Mm-hmm. And I'm assuming that you are also trying to implement and doing this more within your larger or with the issue right now. And so I'd be curious, maybe in a couple months we can touch back and see what new tips you have for larger companies and how it's working and stuff.
Oh yeah, for sure. Well, I should start by saying everybody I've started with has been great. So they've been really supportive. I think some of them might be watching, so I want to hi guys. So there's that.
Yeah. So we'll have to follow up with that later on too.
Yeah.
We have a question from Jeff, and he wants to know, what are some practical ways we can build trust with marketing colleagues?
That's a great question, Jeff. I guess I would say, off the top of my head, marketing people love imagery. They love branding stuff, and so do designers. So I think if you're looking at a great place to start with the imagery. Copy, like that, the tone of voice, the terminology, that's all important too. But people can get enthusiastic about imagery, and it's a great thing to kind of like just get on board with. Just show someone a drawing you made, show someone a graphic you're working on, or like say, like, if you could have anything here, what would it be? So I think it's nice to have, like, talk about cool content, and then you can talk about the heavy stuff.
Yeah. Kind of work your way in there, build that relationship a little bit more.
Yeah.
Okay, so from Robin, we have, do you see any interesting conflicts between the data that marketing has at hand and the UX team?
I mean, there's always a conflict, right? I mean, not like a bad one, but everybody wants to be capable because of the information that they have access to at some point. But you're not really going to get rid of that by aligning on brand imagery. I would say that what you can do is look for first where your goals are overlapping, so you get more cooperation when there's an impasse, because there will be like moments like that. So I wouldn't say that like Mux gets rid of tension between marketing and branding and design, but I think it's easier to have a disagreement when there's an explicit awareness of something, where you guys know that you're on track or have the same interests and need to work together. If there's no space where you guys are working together, it creates a space where it's easier for, I think, things to get tense and be at odds.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, tensions can run quickly high, but I think that when there's like the common goal or the common like feeling that can come out of something, if it's on a smaller scale, then that can help, I think, ease that area as well. Yeah, so we have Costas here, and he wants to know, what comes first for the business, the brand or the product, in a world where you can't focus on both?
You know what? I'm gonna use my caveat I used at the beginning. It depends on your product. I think with startups, they often need to raise money, and the brand is a way of doing that. So sometimes you can build out a brand with the recognition of a capable team of people who've done good things in the past, and that narrative is actually more important than the product. But if you have a more tech heavy thing that just has to deliver on something, it doesn't matter how beautiful the branding is. Like if you're doing, like, I don't know, medical records, you should probably focus on your cybersecurity before you make any gifts. So I think it's totally industry specific on that one.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this is something actually we think about at the Fountain Institute a lot, about like, does it start with our brand, or like, we are always unsure. The blurred line between like brand and product happens a lot, and it's somewhat easier because there's just two of us, and so in different ways. And that gets harder and harder the more people you have and the large company that you have and the more like siloed areas that you come into. But what I think is also interesting is the trends of like having these interdisciplinary teams where you're all kind of working on something, like a variety of people are working in together. So you almost get the benefits of a small company in a larger team as well.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think it's good to just sort of, and I don't want to be one of those kind of like evangelistic people who say collaboration. I just think it's nice. It's nice when, businesses only encourage collaboration because they know that in like a software world, different stakeholders have a stake in all these different areas. So I think it's just good to make as clear as possible where your concerns are the same early and often, and have a conscious approach to that, more than it's important to like sync up on every last thing, because that's not a solution either.
No, and you spend all the time just making sure you're synced on everything, and then you're not actually utilizing your specialties and doing it in what you need at that moment for the product or brand or what business or whatever it is that you're talking about at that moment. Yeah. So we have a question here from Kyle. I think I'm saying their name right or wrong. I have found that as I work with marketing, when reviewing components for a redesign, some questions remain unresolved due to the unknown data model. Thoughts here? An example is product specifications.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to like suppose anything, but it looks like the data model, I mean, the unknown data model makes me wonder if there even is one, but like there probably is. Let's assume there is. I guess I would just, whenever something doesn't agree with something abstract and someone can't really specify what it is. I mean, in my freelancer life, that meant someone either didn't know or didn't want me to know. So I guess what I would say is, like, when marketing reviews components, maybe marketing always wants, in my experience, the marketing wants the buttons to be big and shiny and bright and some sort of insane primary color, because that's a really great way to like have there be no doubt that the call to action is like found or something. That's not, but when it comes to data, like the motivation could be less clear. So I hesitate, but I would say, yeah, maybe ask what in the data model is not resolved and what would be done to resolve it.
Very, very good maneuvering of that question. I was like, I don't know what to say there. So, but yeah, I want to be conscious of time, and we're hitting close to 8:00. And so if you guys have some more questions, I see that there are some more in here. I think Jesse's going to be able to stick around for a little bit on the tables, ask any more specific questions that you guys have for him. But this is going to end the kind of talk section of the meetup today. Sorry, I'm just pulling up a couple. I just wanted to kind of announce that we will have our next meetup on April 14th with Adam Ziner. He's going to be speaking about design makes futures. He's a senior strategic designer based out of Austin, Texas. He also is on the board of Speculative Futures. So he's going to kind of be talking through some of those ideas there. So please feel free to join us there. Jess